You know what's interesting about empaths? They're the only people on earth who apologize for someone else's cruelty. They carry guilt that isn't theirs. They hold shame that belongs to another. And while they're busy healing wounds they didn't create, the narcissist sits in an empty room, surrounded by trophies they can't feel. Let me tell you something that might change how you see your entire journey. Your capacity to feel deeply isn't a weakness. Your ability to see the good in people who've shown you nothing but manipulation isn't naivety. It's a gift that was exploited. And there's a massive difference between being broken and being temporarily deceived by someone who made deception an art form. You're here because something inside you is shifting. You're here because you're starting to question the narrative you've been living under. That voice in your head that says you weren't enough, you didn't try hard enough, you didn't love hard enough. That voice doesn't belong to you. It was planted there carefully, systematically, by someone who needed you to doubt yourself so they could maintain control. Let's talk about what really happens in these dynamics, because you need to understand the mechanics of this. The narcissist doesn't just hurt you randomly. They're not cruel by accident. They study you. They learn what makes you light up. They discover your deepest wounds, and then they weaponize your own heart against you. You told them about your childhood, about the parent who left, about the friend who betrayed you, about the dream you were too scared to chase. And they listened, they held you, they promised they were different, but what you didn't know is they were taking notes. They were building a blueprint of your vulnerabilities. Here's what happens next. They create a version of love that feels like addiction. One day they're your soulmate, the next day they're a stranger. One moment, you're the most important person in their world. The next moment, you're fighting for scraps of attention. This isn't love. This is conditioning. This is training you to accept crumbs and call it a feast. And you stayed. Not because you're weak, but because you believed in transformation. You believed that love could heal. You believed that if you just understood them better, gave them more patience, showed them more compassion, they would finally see your worth. But transformation requires self-awareness. And narcissists are allergic to looking inward. Let me be very clear about something. You cannot heal someone who doesn't believe they're wounded. You cannot save someone who thinks everyone else is the problem. You cannot love someone into consciousness who has built their entire identity on avoiding self-reflection. Every time you tried to have a genuine conversation about feelings, what happened? They deflected, they blamed, they twisted your words until you were apologizing for bringing it up. They made you feel crazy for having needs. They convinced you that wanting basic respect was asking too much. This is called gaslighting, and it's not just lying. It's making you distrust your own perception of reality. It's making you doubt your own memory, your own feelings, your own sanity, until you're so confused that you'd rather agree with their version of events than trust yourself. You started keeping the peace instead of speaking your truth. You started walking on eggshells in your own life. You started shrinking, making yourself smaller, quieter, less demanding, less vibrant, less you, all to avoid triggering their rage, their silent treatment, their withdrawal of affection. And here's the part that breaks my heart. You thought you were being loving. You thought you were being understanding. You thought you were being mature. But what you were actually doing was abandoning yourself, betraying your own needs, teaching them that your boundaries were negotiable. Pay attention to this. The narcissist didn't just take your love. They took your energy, your confidence, your joy, your connection to yourself. They isolated you from friends who saw through them. They criticized family members who questioned the relationship. They made sure your world revolved around them until you forgot what you were like before them. You used to laugh easily. You used to trust your intuition. You used to feel alive. And slowly, day by day, interaction by interaction, you dimmed. Not because you were weak, but because you were being systematically dismantled by someone who needed you powerless to feel powerful. Now let's talk about what happens when you finally leave, or when they discard you, because this is where the real battle begins. This is where you discover whether you're going to reclaim yourself or spend years trying to make sense of something that was never meant to make sense. You're going to want answers. You're going to replay every conversation, every fight, Every moment of tenderness followed by cruelty, you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to understand why. Why did they do this? Why weren't you enough? Why did they move on so quickly? Why do they seem fine while you're shattered? Here's your answer. They're not fine. They're empty. And they're searching for the next person to fill that emptiness. Because that's what narcissists do. They don't heal, they replace, they don't grow, they repeat the same patterns, the same manipulation, the same destruction, just with a different person. But you're different. You're capable of something they'll never experience. You're capable of genuine transformation, real healing, authentic growth, not the performance of growth, not the appearance of change, but actual evolution of consciousness. This is where your power lies, in your ability to feel the pain and let it teach you, in your willingness to sit with the discomfort of healing instead of running to the next distraction, in your courage to look at yourself honestly and ask the hard questions. Why did you stay? What need were they meeting? What wound were they temporarily numbing? Because until you answer these questions, you're at risk of attracting the same dynamic with a different face. Let me tell you what most people won't. Your childhood matters. The way you were loved or not loved matters. The way you learn to earn affection matters. If you grew up believing that love was conditional, that you had to perform to be valued, that your needs were a burden, you were primed for this kind of relationship, the narcissist didn't create your wounds. They found them, they exploited them, but they didn't create them. And this is actually good news, because it means your healing isn't dependent on them. Your growth isn't waiting for their apology. Your peace isn't contingent on their awareness. You get to heal regardless of whether they ever understand what they did. You get to grow regardless of whether they ever acknowledge the pain. You get to thrive regardless of whether they ever regret losing you. This is your power. Your healing belongs to you alone. But here's what you need to know about healing. It's not linear. It's not pretty. It's not a straight path from pain to peace. You're going to have good days where you feel strong. And you're going to have bad days where you miss them. You're going to have moments of clarity. And you're going to have moments where you doubt everything. This is normal. This is part of the process. Your brain formed neural pathways around this person. Your nervous system got used to the chaos. Your body became addicted to the cycle of pain and relief. Breaking free isn't just an emotional process. It's a biological one. You have to rewire yourself. You have to teach your nervous system that calm isn't boring, that consistency isn't cold, that someone treating you well isn't suspicious, that peace isn't the absence of passion, it's the presence of safety. This takes time, this takes patience with yourself, this takes compassion for the parts of you that still want to reach out, still want to check their social media, still want to know if they're thinking about you. These urges don't make you weak. They make you human. But here's what you do with those urges. You observe them. You don't act on them. You feel the pull without following it. Because every time you resist the impulse to reach out, you're building new neural pathways. You're teaching yourself that you can sit with discomfort without running back to what's familiar. And this is where the real transformation happens. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the big decisions, but in the small daily choices to honor yourself, to choose yourself, to prioritize your healing over their comfort. You choose to block them instead of leaving a door open. You choose to delete old messages instead of rereading them. You choose to call a friend instead of texting them. You choose to feel your feelings instead of numbing them. You choose to go to therapy instead of pretending you're fine. These small choices compound, day by day, week by week, month by month, until one day you realize you went an entire day without thinking about them. You went an entire week without checking up on them. You went an entire month without wondering if they regret losing you. And that's when you know you're healing. Not because you hate them, but because you're indifferent. Not because you're over them, but because you're into yourself again. Not because you've forgiven them, but because you've freed yourself from the need for their validation. Let's talk about forgiveness for a moment. Because this word gets thrown around like it's simple, like it's something you owe, like it's the final step in healing. But forgiveness isn't about them. It's never about them. It's about releasing yourself from the prison of resentment. You don't forgive to let them off the hook. You forgive to free yourself from carrying their weight. You forgive because you're tired of giving them space in your head. You forgive because you deserve peace more than they deserve punishment. But here's what forgiveness isn't. It isn't reconciliation. It isn't pretending it didn't happen. It isn't minimizing the damage. It isn't giving them another chance. You can forgive someone and still want nothing to do with them. You can release the anger and still maintain the boundary. You can let go of bitterness and still remember the lessons. Because the lessons are what make your healing eternal. This experience taught you what you will never tolerate again. It showed you what real love isn't. It revealed patterns you didn't know you had. It forced you to develop boundaries you never knew you needed. You learned that love without respect is manipulation. That chemistry without compatibility is chaos. That potential isn't the same as reality. That words without consistent action are just noise. That someone can say they love you while systematically destroying your self-worth. These aren't just intellectual understandings. These are truths carved into your bones now. Truths that will protect you, guide you, redirect you when you're tempted to compromise yourself for connection. And this is why your healing is eternal, because you're not just recovering from what happened. You're becoming someone who could never be treated that way again. Not because you're harder, but because you're wiser. Not because you're closed off, but because you're discerning. You're learning to trust your intuition again. That voice inside you that whispered warnings you ignored. That feeling in your gut when something was off. That instinct that knew before your mind caught up. You're learning to honor that voice instead of overriding it with hope. You're learning to watch behavior instead of believing words, to notice patterns instead of excusing incidents, to see who someone actually is instead of who you need them to be, to accept reality instead of clinging to potential. This is emotional maturity. This is psychological sophistication. This is the kind of wisdom that only comes through walking through fire and choosing to learn from the burns instead of just scarring. Meanwhile, the narcissist hasn't learned anything. They've moved on to someone new. They're telling the same stories, making the same promises, playing the same role. And for a while, it will work because they're good at beginnings. They're experts at the honeymoon phase. They know how to mirror, how to charm, how to make someone feel chosen. But it never lasts because it can't, because it's not real. It's a performance. And eventually the mask slips, the pattern repeats, the cycle continues, and they're left alone again. Not physically alone necessarily, but alone in the way that matters, emotionally disconnected from everyone, unable to experience genuine intimacy. Incapable of real vulnerability. Here's what you need to understand about narcissists. They don't experience regret the way you do. They don't reflect on their behavior with genuine remorse. They don't lay awake at night wondering how they hurt you. Their regret is different. It's shallow. It's self-focused. They might regret losing the supply you provided, the attention, the admiration, the service. They might regret losing the image of the relationship, the way you made them look, the stability you provided. But they don't regret hurting you. Because to regret hurting someone, you have to be capable of empathy. And empathy requires self-awareness they don't possess. So when they reach out months or years later, understand what's happening, they're not reaching out because they've changed. They're reaching out because their current situation isn't working. They're bored. They're alone. They're nostalgic. They remember how you made them feel about themselves. And they're testing to see if you're still available. If you've healed enough to be hurt again, if you've forgotten enough to be fooled again, if you're lonely enough to be manipulated again, this is called hoovering. And it's one of the most dangerous phases because you've been doing the work, you've been healing, you've been growing. And a part of you wants to believe they've been doing the same. A part of you wants to believe they finally understand, finally see you, finally appreciate what they lost. But they haven't. And here's how you know. Real change takes years of consistent therapy, years of uncomfortable self-reflection, years of choosing growth over ego, years of actually changing behavior patterns, not just talking about change, not just promising to be different, but actually doing the daily work of transformation. And narcissists don't do that work because it requires admitting they're the problem. It requires feeling the full weight of the pain they've caused. It requires humility they see as weakness. It requires vulnerability they experience as danger. So when they come back, you have a choice. You can believe the words and ignore the evidence. Or you can remember who they showed you they were and honor what you learned. You can give them another chance and lose more years. Or you can protect your peace and trust your healing. This is where you prove to yourself that you've changed. Not by how you respond to them, but by whether you respond at all. Not by what you say, but by the boundary you maintain. Not by explaining yourself, but by simply walking away and staying away. Because you don't owe them closure. You don't owe them a conversation. You don't owe them an explanation of why you won't engage. You already gave them everything. Your time, your energy, your love, your patience, your forgiveness, your second chances, your third chances, your 10th chances. You don't owe them anything anymore. What you owe is to yourself. You owe yourself protection. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself the life you've been building without them. You owe yourself the healing you've been fighting for. And that healing, that's what lasts. That's what's eternal. Because you're not just moving on from them, you're moving into yourself. You're not just getting over a relationship. You're discovering who you are without their distortion. You're finding your voice again, the one they silenced. You're reclaiming your power, the one they diminished. You're reconnecting with your intuition, the one they made you doubt. You're rebuilding your self-worth, the one they systematically destroyed. This isn't easy work. This isn't quick work. This isn't work that looks impressive on the outside. You're not posting transformation photos. You're not celebrating milestone moments. You're doing the quiet, unglamorous work of putting yourself back together. You're sitting with a therapist unpacking childhood wounds. You're journaling at midnight trying to understand patterns. You're meditating in the morning trying to calm your nervous system. You're reading books about attachment and trauma. You're listening to content that helps you make sense of what happened. You're learning about codependency, about people-pleasing, about fawning responses, about trauma bonds, about why you tolerated what you tolerated, about why you stayed when you should have left, about what needs to heal so you never accept that treatment again. This is real healing. This is deep healing. This is the kind of healing that changes your entire trajectory, not just in relationships, but in life, in career, in friendships, in how you show up for yourself. You're learning to set boundaries without guilt, to say no without explaining, to honor your needs without apologizing, to walk away from what doesn't serve you without looking back, to choose peace over drama, to choose growth over comfort, to choose yourself over anyone who asks you to be less. And as you heal, you start to see the relationship differently, not with rose-colored glasses, not with the fantasy of what it could have been, but with clarity about what it actually was. You see the manipulation you excused, the red flags you ignored, the warnings you dismissed, the disrespect you tolerated, and instead of beating yourself up for staying, you have compassion for the person you were, the person who wanted so badly to believe, the person who gave chance after chance, the person who saw potential and ignored reality. That person wasn't stupid. That person was hopeful. And there's a difference. But you're not that person anymore. You've evolved. You've grown. You've learned. Not just intellectually, but cellularly. You've changed at a fundamental level. The things you once tolerated now make you nauseous. The behavior you once excused now makes you angry. The treatment you once accepted now makes you grateful you left. This is how you know you're healing. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've integrated the lessons. Not because the pain is gone, but because you've transformed it into wisdom. Not because you're over it, but because you're through it. And on the other side of this pain is a version of you they never got to meet. A version that's stronger, wiser, more authentic. A version that knows their worth and won't negotiate it. A version that can spot manipulation from a mile away. A version that chooses peace over chaos every single time. This version of you doesn't need them to apologize. Doesn't need them to acknowledge what they did. Doesn't need them to validate your experience. Because you've validated yourself. You've witnessed your own pain. You've honored your own truth. You've chosen your own healing. And that's power they can never touch. That's freedom they can never understand. That's peace they'll never experience. Because while you're doing the work, they're repeating the pattern. While you're growing, they're stagnating. While you're healing, they're hunting for the next supply. Years from now, you'll be thriving. You'll be in healthy relationships. You'll have genuine connections. You'll know what real love feels like. You'll have peace in your life. You'll have rebuilt yourself stronger than before. And you'll barely remember their name without effort. But they'll be the same. Different location maybe, different partner maybe, different job maybe, but the same emptiness, the same inability to connect, the same pattern of destruction, the same loneliness disguised as independence. Because narcissists don't age well. The charm that worked at 25 doesn't work at 45. The looks that open doors start closing them. The manipulation that fooled people becomes obvious. The pattern becomes undeniable. And they end up exactly where they deserve, alone, not because of circumstances, but because of choices. Every person they hurt, every relationship they destroyed, every connection they sabotaged, it all adds up. And eventually, there's no one left who's willing to tolerate them. No one left who believes the lies. No one left who's fooled by the mask. And that's when the regret comes. Not the deep, transformative regret that leads to change, but the shallow, bitter regret of someone who realizes they threw away good people and kept their ego. The regret of someone who sees others thriving and realizes they could have had that if they'd been capable of real love, but it's too late. Because you can't build genuine connection on a foundation of manipulation. You can't create lasting relationships when you're incapable of vulnerability. You can't have real intimacy when you're terrified of being truly known. So while they sit in their regret, you sit in your peace. While they scroll through old photos wondering what if, you're living fully in the present. While they try to convince new people they've changed, you've actually changed. While they perform growth, you've embodied it. This is the ultimate victory. Not over them, but over the parts of yourself that would have stayed, over the beliefs that said you weren't enough, over the patterns that led you there in the first place, over the wounds that made you vulnerable to their manipulation. You healed what they weaponized. You strengthened what they exploited. You reclaimed what they stole. Your empathy, your compassion, your ability to love deeply. These aren't weaknesses. They never were. They're gifts. And now you know how to give them to people who deserve them. You've learned to love yourself as fiercely as you love them. You've learned to protect yourself as carefully as you protected them. You've learned to prioritize yourself as consistently as you prioritize them. You've learned that self-love isn't selfish, it's survival. And from this foundation of self-love, you build a different life. A life where you're not walking on eggshells. A life where you're not managing someone else's emotions. A life where you're not shrinking to make someone else comfortable. A life where you're fully yourself, unapologetically, completely, authentically. This is freedom. This is what healing gives you. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. Not the erasure of memory, but the transformation of meaning. Not the forgetting of what happened, but the integration of why it mattered. You needed this experience to become who you're meant to be. Not because the pain was good, but because your response to it was, you chose healing over bitterness. Growth over stagnation. Wisdom over victimhood. Consciousness over unconsciousness. This choice makes all the difference. This choice determines whether the experience breaks you or builds you. This choice is why your healing is eternal and their regret is empty. Because healing is active. Healing is a choice you make every single day. Healing is work you commit to regardless of how you feel. But regret without change is just nostalgia for supply. It's not real remorse. It's not genuine reflection. It's not authentic transformation. It's just the temporary discomfort of consequences before they move on to the next person and repeat the same pattern. You don't want that kind of regret. You don't want that kind of life. You don't want to be 60 years old looking back at a trail of destruction and wondering why everyone left. You don't want to be alone because you were never willing to do the work of becoming someone worthy of real love. So you're doing something different. You're breaking the cycle. You're healing the wounds. You're becoming conscious of your patterns. You're taking responsibility for your part. You're doing the uncomfortable work of looking at yourself honestly. Not to blame yourself, not to shame yourself, but to free yourself. Because you can't change what you don't acknowledge. You can't heal what you don't feel. You can't grow beyond patterns you won't examine. This is the path of healing. This is the path of wisdom. This is the path that leads to peace, and it's the path they'll never walk. Not because they can't, but because they won't. Because it requires everything they've spent their life avoiding: vulnerability, accountability, self-reflection, genuine change. So let them have their regret. Let them sit with what they lost. Let them realize too late what they had. You're not waiting for that moment. You're not hoping for their epiphany. You're not available for their transformation. You're busy building a life they couldn't destroy. You're busy becoming a person they never knew. You're busy healing in ways they'll never understand. You're busy choosing yourself in ways they never could. And that's your power. That's your freedom. That's your eternal healing. Because it belongs to you. It doesn't depend on them. It doesn't require their participation. It doesn't need their acknowledgement. It's yours completely, eternally, powerfully yours. So keep healing, keep growing, keep choosing yourself, keep building the life you deserve, keep becoming the person you were always meant to be, not despite what happened, but because of how you chose to respond to it. Your healing is eternal because it's rooted in truth. Their regret is temporary because it's rooted in loss of supply. You're free because you're conscious. They're trapped because they're not. You're growing because you're willing. They're stuck because they're not. This is the difference that changes everything. This is the truth that sets you free. This is the wisdom that makes the pain worthwhile. You healed, they didn't. You grew, they didn't. You changed, they didn't. And that makes all the difference in the world. Let me tell you what happens next in your journey, because this isn't the end of your story. This is the beginning. The beginning of a life where you're not controlled by fear, where you're not motivated by avoiding pain, where you're not making decisions based on keeping the peace. You start attracting different people, not because you changed your appearance, not because you moved to a new city, but because you changed your energy. You changed what you're available for. You changed what you radiate into the world. Healthy people notice you now. People with emotional intelligence, people who've done their own work, people who can meet you at your depth, people who don't run from vulnerability, people who value what you bring instead of exploiting it. And at first it feels strange, because kindness without conditions feels suspicious, because consistency without chaos feels boring, because respect without games feels unfamiliar. Your nervous system has to adjust to what healthy actually feels like. You might even push these people away at first. Test them. Wait for the other shoe to drop. Expect the pattern to repeat. This is normal. This is your system protecting you based on past data. But slowly, you learn to receive love that doesn't hurt. You learn that real love is calm. It's steady. It's boring in the most beautiful way. It doesn't spike your adrenaline. It doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't make you anxious. It makes you feel safe. And safety, you realize, is what you needed all along. Not the excitement of chaos, not the intensity of drama, not the roller coaster of emotions, but the quiet peace of being with someone who shows up consistently, who communicates clearly, who respects your boundaries, who celebrates your growth, who wants you to thrive. This is what you deserve. This is what was always available. You just couldn't see it before. You couldn't receive it before. You weren't ready for it before. But now you are. Now you understand the difference between chemistry and compatibility, between intensity and intimacy, between infatuation and real love. And you also understand something else. You understand that you don't need a relationship to be whole. You don't need another person to complete you. You don't need external validation to know your worth. You've become your own source of love, security, and peace. This is the ultimate freedom. This is what makes your healing unshakable, because it's not dependent on anyone else. It's not contingent on circumstances. It's not waiting for the right person to appear. It's already here. It's already within you. It's already complete. You've spent years giving yourself what you were begging them to give you: compassion, understanding, patience, forgiveness, acceptance. And in that process, you've discovered something they'll never know, that the love you need most is your own. So as you move forward, remember this: you survived what was designed to destroy you. You healed what was meant to break you. You grew from what was meant to diminish you. You transformed pain into power, wounds into wisdom, trauma into triumph. This is your legacy. This is your truth. This is your eternal healing. And no one can ever take that away from you.